Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum. Folks, I wish that the title of this video was just in fact clickbait, but it's not. For those of you who watch the channel regularly, hopefully you'll agree that I don't do clickbait. The title of this video is absolutely true. Here in Canada, in the province of Ontario, they have banned, in the Ontario Legislature, which is the Ontario government building, they have banned the wearing of the traditional Palestinian Keffiyeh. To give you a bit of context, the province of Ontario is arguably the most important province in Canada. Our capital city, Ottawa, is in the province of Ontario. The largest city, Toronto, is also in the province of Ontario. And so it's here in Ontario, in the Ontario Legislature building, that the wearing of the keffiyeh has been banned. And yes, I did say Ontario, not Quebec. Some of you are thinking, I must be talking about Quebec. I must be talking about French Canada because the French do that kind of thing. They're known to be xenophobic at times. And, you know, I mean, the French are the French. But no, unfortunately, I am talking about English Canada. I'm talking about the province of Ontario. And the person responsible for doing this ban was the Speaker of the House, the Honorable Speaker in the Ontario Legislature, Ted Arnott. Now, just to be clear, this was not some law that was passed by the Ontario government, so we can't really blame the government for this. In fact, the Premier of the province, Doug Ford, credit to him, he spoke up against this ban. He thinks it's unnecessary. He thinks it's divisive. And other politicians, the majority of them in the Ontario Legislature, have also voiced their outrage and their opposition to this move, including the opposition parties as well. One of the few, if not the only, MPP or member of provincial parliament who was very vocal in her support for the ban was, by no surprise, Conservative Party MPP Robin Martin, who is from the Eglinton Lawrence constituency. No comment on that for those who know. Those who are in the know. But she's very pro-Zionist, and she's made every effort on X, formerly known as Twitter, to paint pro-Palestinians as being terrorist sympathizers. They're all pro-Hamas, barbarian and savage and that kind of thing. What I would like to propose is that, especially as Muslims, since our religion, Islam, is a religion of hope, our religion is one of optimism. Our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, always tried to put a positive, optimistic twist on things. I would suggest that for us, instead of just looking at this through the lens of outrage or anger or criticism, we should also look at this through a positive lens, meaning that I really do believe that the speaker, Ted Arnott, has handed the pro-Palestinian cause a moral victory. He's kind of handed us a moral victory on a platter, because the larger statement that's being made here is that the pro-Palestinian voices have become so loud. Pro-Palestinian voices have become so dominant, maybe not in the official mainstream media narrative, but everywhere else. University campuses, alternative media, social media, on the street level. The wearing of this has become so commonplace that they now have to resort to this. They now have to stoop to this low, scraping the bottom of the barrel in a desperate attempt to silence and to repress those pro-Palestinian voices. And again, from a religious perspective, we all know that persecution is the fertilizer of faith. So moves like this have never weakened Islam. Moves like this have never weakened the Muslims. They've only made us even stronger. And in fact, I would also humbly propose that not only Muslims, not only Arabs, but even many Canadians, many people such as myself who actually never wore a keffiyeh, the only reason I even have this, honestly, is because it was gifted to me. Somebody gave this to me 2 or 3 months ago, and I never wore it. But now, thanks to the Speaker of the House, the Speaker of the Ontario Legislature, Ted Arnott, I am going to put it on for the first time. And Ah, ah. And whew, I would propose that many other Canadians, not just those who are necessarily pro Palestinian, but even other Canadians who are otherwise concerned with the issue of freedom of expression and freedom of religion and freedom of speech, I would propose and I would suggest and recommend that even many other Canadians who have never worn this try this on for the first time, not just as expressing your dissent against the crimes of Israel. It doesn't have to mean that. This can mean whatever you want it to mean. You could wear this as a sign of dissent and disapproval of the ban that was passed in the Ontario Legislature. So try it on. It actually looks, I think it looks all right. Looks kind of nice. And maybe even try it on like this. Look too much like Asim Al Hakim. And I don't really have a joke to go with it. So just put it on like this. And I mean, really, banning a clothing item. I mean, this just goes to highlight, and we've seen this since the very beginning of this Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this is a good thing because things have come out in plain view now. We've seen the double standards. We've seen the hypocrisy of Western societies in their attitudes towards Muslims and Muslim societies. I mean, banning clothing items, especially clothing items that don't pose any threat to the moral order of the society, clothing items that don't pose any threat to family order, because I want to be consistent here, right? For you banning a piece of clothing, isn't that the very thing that you criticize Muslim societies for? Isn't that the very same thing that you criticize Islamic societies for? Are you not telling men and women now, Muslim and non-Muslim, Arab and non-Arab, that they cannot wear this piece of clothing into the Ontario Legislature? That really stinks of hypocrisy. Now, the honorable or not so honorable speaker, Ted Arnott, he has justified his ruling by saying that there was already a previous ruling in effect that said that clothing items like T-shirts and banners and signs in the gallery that have political messaging are not allowed in the legislature building. However, I would ask, why is that the case? See, just taking a step back, so far, Canadians, including those Canadian politicians who have opposed the ban on the Keffiyeh, they have said that this is not just a symbol of political expression. This is also a part of Arab culture as well. And that's true. That's a valid argument. I agree with that. Palestinians and Arabs have been wearing this long before the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, long before there was a country called Israel. There are Arab Christians, there are Palestinian Christians who wear this all the time. So that's a valid argument. But I want to go beyond that. And I want to say that even if this was political messaging, why exactly is that not allowed in the Ontario Legislature? After all, there are other clothing items, there are other things that are worn that do signal political messaging. So, for example, in the days leading up to Remembrance Day, is it not the case that the majority of the MPPs, the members of the provincial parliament, as well as employees in the legislature building, as well as the spectators or the people sitting in the viewing gallery, do they not wear red poppies on Remembrance Day, on the days leading up to Remembrance Day, on many days after Remembrance Day? Do those poppies, does the wearing of those poppies not also contain within it some political messaging? Are those poppies not a statement that tell us politically what side we were on during World War One? Do those red poppies not tell us what side we were on during World War Two? And if that's the case, then why can't I wear a piece of clothing that expresses that I am on the side of 30,000 plus Palestinian civilians, most of whom were children who were slaughtered by Israeli bombs with US and Western support? Why can't I do that? Well, there are answers even to that question. And so, for example, the speaker, Ted Arnott, he commented on his ruling and he said, it's extremely politically sensitive, obviously, but procedurally, I believe I made the right decision in the sense of past rulings of speakers and precedents and traditions. There's a reason why I'm emphasizing these words. So, in other words, there is an acknowledgement that there is a double standard. There is an acknowledgement by the speaker that some items of clothing that are worn on your body may contain political messaging, but those are those items which are in line with the past rulings that previous speakers of the House made, and those items of clothing are in line with previous precedents and traditions. Fine. As usual, I'm willing to be reasonable. In other words, what we deem to be Canadian, what we deem to be Canadian enough. Even though this has now become a clothing item that is part of Palestinian Canadian culture, Arab Canadian culture, Muslim Canadian culture. But nonetheless, it's not Canadian enough, and that's why we're not allowing it. Fine, fair enough. But at least now be consistent with that reasoning. Please understand that you lose all moral credibility to criticize Muslim societies when they ban certain pieces of clothing for reasons of their culture, their tradition, their precedents. If we have the right to rule that this piece of clothing may be worn, this piece of clothing may not be worn, even when it doesn't present any threat to family or to public morality, then all the more so, Muslim societies have the right to legislate clothing and guidelines about clothing which are in accordance with their precedents, their past rulings, their traditions, their culture. And by the way, as a Muslim, I want to add that their culture, their precedents, their traditions, when it comes specifically to things like the hijab, are not just random, arbitrary rules that are made for political convenience or due to the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. They are in line with what we believe to be divine commands. So all the more so, Muslim societies have the right to legislate, or I should say to agree with divine legislation that we believe has been ordained by God and by his prophet. So let's at least remain consistent on that point. I will remain consistent on my point, and I will say, fine, if societies have the right to deem what is appropriate or inappropriate clothing and to enforce that legally based on traditions and precedent and culture, then fine. Then the Ontario Legislature has the right to lay down this rule that no keffiyeh may be worn in the Ontario Legislature. But I still want to have a bit of fun with that. And so I would still encourage, as I said, not just Muslims, not just Arabs, but any Canadian who is otherwise concerned with this important issue of freedom of expression and what we can wear, what we can't wear. I would encourage such people to test this rule out and to try to enter the viewer gallery at the Ontario Legislature with not this, hey, I don't encourage the breaking of rules, right? But how about something like this? This is more of my style. It's something I bought years ago. So is something like this a keffiyeh? How do you define what a keffiyeh is? Would I be able to wear this into the Ontario Legislature without being stopped or without being harassed? How many white lines, how many black dots are allowed on the fabric before it's considered a keffiyeh? I don't have the answer myself. Why don't we find out? Test out the rule. So I would encourage Canadians to test out the rule and see, and maybe even record what your findings are so that the rest of us can know and show the rest of the world what is happening here in English Canada, in Ontario, with the banning of the keffiyeh in the Ontario Legislature. That's all for now, folks. Thanks for watching. Barakallahu feekum. Leave your comments down below. Take care and Assalamu alaikum.